Hello everyone, and welcome to Leadership Cards for Connection. I'm Emilie Poissenot, and I'm the lead game designer at League of Geeks. And if everything has gone according to plan, I'm not only in this little box on screen, I'm also in chat ready to interact with you and answer any of your questions. It's my third time doing a talk on leadership and people management, because I'm really passionate about giving ourselves the tools to have as positive an impact on our team as possible. And when thinking about this year's GCAP theme, Pathways to Connect, it's very obvious to me that a leader plays an active role in making sure their team gels, in fostering connections between team members so that the team can be highly collaborative and smash through problems with innovative solutions. If it's your third time coming to one of my talks on leadership, you may be thinking, don't we already have a bunch of tools for connections? And you're not wrong. In year one, we talked about bonding. In year two, we talked about communication and guidance. But sometimes it's not just about the tools that we have. It's also about how we use them. One of the differences between a boss and a leader looks like this. I'm sure you've had the opportunity to work with a boss. Someone who fosters one-on-one connections with individual team members, hoards information, and then doles it out with other individuals as needed. A boss is someone who puts themselves at the center of all of the collaborative initiative. They may even discourage team members from talking to each other directly. In a way, they're making themselves artificially indispensable. Because they're at the center of everything, if they leave the team crumbles because the communication channels and the collaboration has not been established between anyone else. In contrast, a leader doesn't feel the need to be at the center. A leader will foster connections between people as much as they foster connections with themselves. If the best way to get the work done and for everyone to do their best work is to make two people collaborate together without any hindrance, a leader will facilitate that. And yes, the goal is for us to be leaders and not be bosses. And it's easy to think that we can always be leader just by knowing that we need to not put ourselves at the center. But sometimes the difference between a leader and a boss is just the amount of pressure we're under. As Brené Brown puts it, we're emotional beings who, on occasion, think. And when we're under stress, when we're under pressure, we can revert into a boss. Our emotional reactions can make us break the connections and the collaboration that we want to foster. This whole reaction of hoarding information can be a stress reaction to imposter syndrome. And we put ourselves at the center in order to make ourselves relevant. It can be a stress reaction to feeling like we don't have control over what's happening. So we insert ourselves in every conversation to maintain that control. We're really a step away from being bosses. And recently, there's a whole bunch of new stress that has been added to the reality of our lives. And that's on top of any existing stress of running a team, managing conflict, coming up to big deliverables, launching a game. By the way, I bow down to anyone who's launched a game during this pandemic. These are true tests of leadership, of our ability to manage our own emotion so we don't stand in the way of using our tools in the best way possible. So when looking at the sea of tools and topics that we could tackle today, I've decided to focus on helping us navigate tension so that we don't stand in the way of connections and collaboration. As usual, this is a very broad topic. This is part of the reason why it's the third year of me discussing it. There is no way I can cover all of it in 50 minutes. My hope here is to give you a few tools that you feel comfortable using as soon as you're back in the office, and pique your curiosity to give you paths for your own growth and research in the future. When thinking about the role of a leader in navigating tension, I feel like the crux of it is really our emotional intelligence. And that all begins with self-awareness, being able to recognize when we're having a negative emotional reaction and manage that situation for ourselves. Another part of emotional intelligence is social awareness, noticing the emotions of other and playing an active role in helping them through it. And lastly, as leaders, we play a key role in creating an environment that has as little tension as possible and that feels psychologically safe for our team members. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be challenges, that there's not going to be tension, but we're trying to craft an environment where people feel confident that whatever problem comes, we'll be able to work through it. Let's get started, shall we? First stack of cards, self-awareness, or as I like to think about it, dodging the urge to be a boss. Now, self-awareness is not something that I can give you a single card and solve for you. This is a journey. Self-awareness is a muscle that we gradually train by getting to know ourselves better. And you attending this talk and becoming aware of more tools that you can use on yourself starts increasing that self-awareness a little bit. Getting on to the first tool. I can't see the crowd at the moment, but I'm going to go ahead and presume we're all humans. And as humans, as emotional beings, we all have fuses. What I see as fuses are those irritants, those types of conversations, those phrases that make us have a very negative reaction. Now, there are things that can be small annoyances that aren't necessarily fuses. For example, when I'm in a situation where someone tells me something along the line of, I don't think you're the right person for this, but I feel confident that I am, I just brush it off and I'm happy to prove them wrong. If that happens several times, it may start actually creating negative emotional reactions. But when it's just the first time, it really doesn't faze me. That may be different for you. Everyone has different fuses. On the other hand, because collaboration is one of my core values and is really, really important to me, when I'm in a situation where someone is just not collaborative, it makes me really angry really quickly. And I have to make a conscious effort to stay involved in a conversation and try to get to a resolution. Taking the time to identify your fuses allow you to plan for them, to recognize them when they get lit, and to prevent the explosion, all of the negative emotional reactions that have splash damage for the rest of the team. For me, what's really important with this is to remember that, again, we're all humans and we all have fuses. And as a leader, it's impossible and we shouldn't try to get rid of all of our fuses. We should look at ourselves with self-compassion and accept our weaknesses and the things that stress us out, and seek to understand them so that we can manage them and prevent them. So in a way, it's a simple exercise, but it's not an easy one. Because finding our fuses require us digging into moments where we weren't our best self, where we failed as a leader, where our emotional reactions got in the way of us using our tools and leading the team. So you want to think about all of these moments and ask yourself, what do they have in common? Sometimes the best thread to pull to find a fuse is to think about, what are your values? And the situations that make us feel like they got compromised. This is one of the threads I pull often. And then try to get an understanding of really what's the crux of it. What's the fuse? What's the trigger that causes the explosion to happen? And how long do you have after this tension is applied before the explosion happens? As I mentioned before, for me, phrases, behaviors, approaches that disable collaboration are a very short fuse, and I'm very conscious of that. other irritants I have more patience for. And I think it's also important that we understand what our explosion looks like. For some people, an explosion looks like anger. For other people, it may be an implosion and look like self-doubt. Or it may be outright disengagement from the stressful, difficult situation. And understanding what that explosion is and what ripple effect it will have on the team allows us to manage the situation a lot better. And that takes me to our second tool for today. When we feel like a fuse has been lit and is starting to burn, we should try and use scissors and cut it off before the explosion. It's a leader's job to use scissors for ourselves, to manage our own negative emotional reaction and prevent them from happening, but also when we feel tension coming on the team. Scissors are tools, as I said, to cut those fuses and allow us to lead through those tense situations where we know that an irritant is burning and still work through it and diffuse the situation. They allow us to maintain our best self. That being said, they're a band-aid solution. If a fuse has been lit, if there's a tense situation, a key problem, and we just cut the fuse, but we don't lead the conversations or take the step to actually resolve the irritant, that fuse is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And once it's relit, the explosion is ever closer. It's the principle of a pebble in the shoe. The first time you feel it, it's tiny, it's kind of fine, but the more you walk on it, the more it starts feeling like a mountain you can't overcome. So using a scissor is not solving the problem, it is enabling us to work on solving the problem. This is a list of potential scissors, and some of them work better for certain fuses than others. For example, if you know that you're about to step in a meeting that is gonna create negative reactions for you, that is likely to light some of your fuses. For example, you're going to give feedback to someone who's very resistant to feedback. You can plan ahead and think about and visualize how it's going to feel to go through that conversation. What fuses are going to be lit, what emotions are going to, start popping up, and think ahead of time about how you're going to manage them. That's going to make them less scary in the moment and easier to keep leading through. Sometimes the best scissor is asking for what you need. If you're in the middle of a conversation and you feel like the other person is not listening to you and that's slowly leading you towards an explosion, you can push the conversation to where you need it to go. For example, if someone is making a lot of assumptions about the type of problems I'm trying to fix and trying to force a solution forward, this is one of those things that I consider preventing collaboration between us. And my scissor for that is to say something along the line of, I understand that you want to help me with this problem. I think we're coming at it from a different angle, so I'd like us to take a step back so I can give you a little bit more of my context. And hopefully the person agrees, and we can then start collaborating on solving the problem. And that prevents me from blowing up entirely. Vulnerability can also be really useful. You can acknowledge when you're having a strong emotional reaction, not in a way that dumps all of your emotional labor on the rest of the team, but in a way that enables them to help you work through the situation, or in a way that names the emotion that everyone is feeling and making it okay for everyone to be a little bit frustrated at the moment and to take a step back, gain patience, and keep going. Empathy is really important, reminding ourselves that the other person is also under stress and may also have their own fuses and that they're not out to get us. And that if we just keep going, we can work our way through this. Sometimes bringing in a moderator, a third party who doesn't have all of the historical baggage of the conversation, can also be a really nice way to prevent tension from forming. Taking a deep breath can really help as well. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying doing this, which everyone will clearly interpret as anger, but you can do things along the lines of, when you feel like your fuse is burning, saying something like, okay, that was a lot of information. I only have half-formed thoughts. Just give me a second to line them up. And then re-engaging in the conversation. If the situation isn't so tense yet, the team will usually be happy to give you that little bit of space to keep going. Sometimes the only solution is to step away to diffuse that tension. And it's okay as a leader to close a meeting and, just move, take a break, and then return later. You can say things like, okay, I think we've discussed a lot of aspects of the problem. I don't think we can get into resolution in this meeting. Let's take a little bit of time to think about it, reschedule a meeting for tomorrow. It makes it okay for everyone to walk away, manage their own emotions, and then come back with clearer minds. The last bit that can be really useful as a leader is to know what quick recovery activities you can use. Now, that's different from self-care. If you feel like all of your fuses are getting really, really short because you've used scissors often, take a long weekend, take time to recharge, do all of your self-care activities. Recovery activities are more within the realm of taking a walk around the block. When you've been stressed and you know you're not in an emotional state where you can be as positive an impact on the team as possible, you can take a walk around the block between meetings. Or with working from home, have a little dance party. Or do what I do, I burst into songs. I do it when I walk out of a stressful meeting or before I walk into a meeting that I know will have a lot of fuses. It helps me ground myself and be my best self when interacting with the team. The next tool is essentially what happens when we can't use scissors. Either because we're not in control enough of the situation or because we don't have the energy and the patience to dive into the fray and use a scissor to cut a fuse. This is what we call the armor. Your armor is all of your defense mechanisms pulled together. It's a great tool to give ourselves safety and space. And if we're in very toxic environments, sometimes it's the only tool that we can use. But when we put on an armor, we also put a barrier between the connection with other people and barriers to troubleshooting and collaboration. It's very hard to talk through this visor and this helmet. So understanding the armor is not just about using it when we need it, it's also understanding how to push against it and shed it when it gets in the way of us getting to a resolution. Understanding what our armor is also allows us to manage the effect that it has on the team. And it's also part of being self-aware. Some of the most elusive fuses that are harder for us to identify and accept, sometimes we'll realize what they are because we're going to feel ourselves put on the armor and then work our way back to what triggered that reaction. I think it's important for all of us to know what constitute our individual armor. And it's different for different people, but it may also be different based on the situation that got us to have a negative reaction. Now, when looking at this list, except for a couple of them, These are good leader traits, but when used to an extreme, when used as part of an armor, they're the traits of a boss. For example, self-reliance is not necessarily bad in and of itself, but that's the, oh, I'll just do it myself. Instead of trying to troubleshoot the situation with the people involved, just hoarding the responsibility and taking over. It really blurs the line of who's responsible for what on the team and disables the collaboration to solve that problem. Cynicism is a really, really bad one. Because when we start thinking that, that person is out to get us, or we start ranting about people on the team, in a way we've given up on that relationship. It's a way to absolve ourselves of any responsibility in the problem, but it doesn't enable us to solve the problem. Being overly confident and having this attitude of, I know best, I'm just going to figure it out. And stopping to listen to what the other person is saying because they're wrong and I'm right, also has a host of problems associated to it. Confidence is definitely part of my armor. Collaboration is so important to me that I feel like it's always the best solution and I know best what is the process to get to a resolution. And then that merges with a little bit of dismissal and I stop listening. By knowing this about myself, when I feel myself putting on my armor, I can remind myself to keep listening, keep listening, keep listening. And push back against that armor. Or if I'm not able to do it in the moment, in a very tense conversation, for example, I know that at some point I need to come back to the conversation once I've rested and ask the other person for their point of view again. Or revisit the conversation and take a second look at what they said. Sometimes the armor looks like digging your heels in and refusing to cave and refusing to bend. Or walking out of the conversation or avoiding the tense situation entirely, avoiding difficult conversations. It can look like deflection, blaming other people for the problem instead of taking it on ourselves and taking a real look at our role in that tense situation. Sometimes we can downplay the problem at hand or dismiss it entirely. Or sometimes the reaction to being in that tense state is to try and enforce our authority and just get things done the way we say because we're in power, we're the lead, just listen. Decisiveness is another one that can be really tricky to manage because sometimes decisiveness is the way to move forward. But if we're rushing to decisions too much and not taking the time to truly listen to every aspect of the problem and analyzing the tension, then we're likely to have the wrong solution and to make other team members feel like they weren't listened to. Humor can make us come across as not taking things seriously. Laughing off the tension can help diffuse it sometimes, but can also create the wrong impression. And then the last one is protecting ourselves by seeking to please and seeking approval and validation and potentially letting go of our own opinions in order to get that love. That prevents us from leading efficiently. Again, the important thing here is to be compassionate with yourself. We all have an armor. And understanding it and accepting it gives us the tools to manage it when it shows up and to recognize the impact that it can have on the team so we can prevent it. That brings us to our second pile of tools. Everyone on the team also has fuses, also have armor. And when we feel all of these people getting tense, it's really easy for us to get tense as well. But by remaining observant and by developing certain reflexes and keeping up the investigation into the source of tension, we can avoid some of these fuses exploding and spot them ahead of time so we can troubleshoot them. The first aspect of it for me is a key tool to prevent inadvertently triggering armor. And that's what I call the curious cat. When we're stressed and we may not have consciously put on armor yet, if a team member comes to us with a task completed, a suggestion, a process improvement, we may just react based on our first impression, instead of taking the time to gather all of the facts. So this is kind of an improvement on active listening. It's making sure that we're not judges of the first solution that's presented to you, that we remain collaborators throughout the process. And that happens by granting team members the benefit of the doubt, even if the solution looks entirely wrong, trying to understand the reason behind they came to that solution and find the source of tension or the armor that's getting in the way of getting the best solution. Being a curious cat is about preventing assumptions, because assumptions are the enemy of collaboration. When we think we know everything about the situation and we're not investigating, we're effectively not involved in problem solving. We're not making ourselves partners in collaboration. And because team members may feel like they only have one shot to be right, and you won't partner up with them if they're wrong, they'll become afraid of failing. When you look like a judge, it makes you scary and is an enemy of psychological safety on the team. So a lot of being a curious cat is about having those internal flags in your head and catching yourself when your initial reaction to something that's presented to you is, that's dumb, that's inefficient, that's not the way to do it. Why do they keep doing this? For me, one of those moments is linked to one of my fuses and values, because it's important for me to collaborate, and because collaboration is so always obviously the answer in my head and the easy path. Sometimes when I see team members and the way they work, my reaction is, why are they not collaborating? This is not the way to do things. And that's deflecting. That's me starting to put on armor and not thinking about what am I doing, or what is the reality of their stress situation and reactions that is preventing them from collaborating. Because when we start digging into the context and everything, when we start asking why, we may realize that they actually have the right solution in the context that they're dealing with. Or maybe they're not working in the most efficient way because we haven't provided the right tool and support. Or maybe the solution that they got to is wrong, but that's because us as leaders haven't provided the proper context, haven't made sure we're aligned, or we haven't supported the work appropriately. As you can probably tell, a lot of the answers here can trigger our own armor falling into place. So it takes active effort to remain a curious cat where everyone is feeling tense and things aren't quite working out. If we don't investigate the reasons behind things are happening, we're not actually solving the problem. We're not diffusing the fuse. We're blaming people for the symptoms. So it's important to remain open, kind, and trust that team members are doing their very best, and stay a collaborator in trying to get to the root of the problem and solving it together. One of the things that's really important as kind of a power-up on being a curious cat is spot problems before they're problems. If you feel like a lot of problems are sneaking up on you and taking you by surprise, this may be because you're not spending enough time looking for the missing piece. Very easy to troubleshoot what's right in your face. really easy when there's a squeaky wheel complaining about something to address that issue. But as we've discussed before in the self-awareness, not everyone's explosion or armor is a loud one. For some people on the team, it's going to be avoiding the problem altogether, or it's going to be self-doubt and anxiety. So as a leader, we sometimes need to take a step back and try to look for what's not there, so that we're balancing out troubleshooting really high priority burning fuses with finding fuses in the making. Looking for the missing piece can really help us reveal underserved needs on the team, find hints of underlying tension. And for me, the most important aspect of it is that it leads me to fuzzy problems and allow me to be proactive and start troubleshooting and resolving the situation before there is so much emotional and historical baggage around it that the collaboration to solve it is that much harder because everyone is deep in their armor. Finding the missing piece is about sitting down and asking ourselves, which desirable behavior are we not seeing? Which part of the framework or the process is no one using? Now, these first two questions are the ones that are likely to get us to put our armor on because they're oftentimes failure in leadership. If people aren't collaborating as I want them to, I may have done something that disables them from collaborating. Or there may be relationships that I haven't been involved enough in developing that prevents collaboration from happening. Third point is an interesting one. As I said, because everyone's armor and explosions are different, it's really important to every now and then check in on the people we haven't heard of in a while. Because they may be doing fine, or they may be suffering in silence. And as leaders, it's up to us to be proactive and check in. We want to think about what discourages or disables the team from doing a task or solving a problem, and then play an active role in helping them through it. And when we're coming up with strategies and plans and improvements, before rolling them out, taking a step back and thinking what piece of information, what input, what validation from which team member is missing from my plan so that it is as strong as it can. That takes us to our last pile for today, which is about us as a leader playing an active role in crafting a space that enables collaboration and connection, that helps a team gel and work together as well as they can, that aims to try and prevent as much fuses from blowing up as possible. Sometimes we'll observe that the team is walking on eggshells. People don't feel confident in the role that they have. They're not sure how to succeed, how to work with the rest of the team. This is because as leaders, we haven't taken enough time to define the sandbox. Now, a good sandbox comes in two pieces: the boundaries around it and the play space that it defines, where the sand is. And both are equally important in crafting a space where the team feels like they have autonomy and confidence in what they're doing. So building a sandbox is about creating clear context for the team to work with and within. It's about stating plainly what the desirable and undesirable behaviors are, so that everyone feels like they know what needs to happen and how we want to work together. And I understand that it can feel a bit confronting to set boundaries. It feels like we're setting up limitations. But the reality of it is that there's always boundaries, even if we don't voice them. And when they're not voiced, it creates fuzziness and misunderstandings. It means that team members may do things because it feels that it's within their purview and their, their play area, and inadvertently trigger your fuses because your perception is that that totally wasn't their job. Or vice versa. You may, start doing certain things that are going to be negative surprises for the team. So taking time to clarify both the boundaries and the play space is extremely important. This is what log refers to as freedom within a framework. This is not a log-only phrase. It's been floating around management books and articles for a little bit, and I couldn't find the actual source, but we've really adopted it at League of Geeks. And freedom within a framework is essentially defining both the sand and the box. And both of these aspects require reinforcing and constant work. If we put freedom on an axis, and we're at the very top of all of the freedom that the team could ever hope for, that's not a very cohesive team. If everyone is free to do whatever they want, the team makes decisions based on individual bias instead of team needs, because the needs aren't clear. There's no framework. There's no context. And it's also likely that the team is going to take a lot of really high risk because there's no accountability. So why not try whatever you feel like and take all of these high risks? This is not a team that has really gelled. In order for the team to connect and collaborate, the team needs a framework, context to work within. When we go to the extreme of having super clear context, this is where very, very strict rules sit. Regimented processes. This is how we do things here. And this lack of flexibility for team members to have input as to how things get done. Sometimes it comes with key performance indicators, actual measures of what success looks like for the team. And that's a very clear context, but it's also a very black and white one. It puts the team in a situation where they don't feel like they have a lot of control, a lot of freedom to make things happen, but they're going to be judged on the result. That creates a fear of failure, and it makes them very likely to just go with the predictable winning conditions so that they meet what the key performance indicator asks for, instead of going above and beyond. It may also lead team members to entirely disengage from the work and just, go through the checklist. If this is how you want me to do things, fine. I'm not going to talk to you about the problems that I have. I'm just going to go through what you ask me to do. This is also not a team that's really connected and collaborating and solving problems together and making sure that we're tackling tensions and finding resolutions that work for everyone. In both cases, both extreme. The tension comes from a different source, but there's tension that's there. The idea of freedom within a framework is to find a state of flow between the two. And that's really a journey of trust. Because establishing the context is about establishing clear values, purposes, and goals, and reinforcing them with the team constantly. They're not as directive as very clear key performance indicators or rules. They're fuzzier, but that's okay. They're fuzzy on purpose because that is the area of freedom for the team. We want them to be defining how the work gets done, as long as we're all working towards the same objectives. And when working with team members, some of them may come from environments that have very strict rules. So when we give them that freedom and we tell them, no, it's okay, this is the sand within the sandbox that you can do whatever you want in, they may feel like we're lying, like there's actually unvoiced boundaries that we're not mentioning. So as leaders, we need to constantly keep reinforcing that no, we intend to give you that freedom and we encourage you to take that freedom and to define how your work needs to happen within the framework that we've agreed on. What that looks like at League of Geeks is essentially this. As a leadership team, we make a conscious effort to provide and align on values and goals. We get the whole team together every 6 to 8 weeks, and we chat through everything that we want to see in the project, the next steps that we should be striving for, and have an open discussion about it. And this is a point in the process where we actually invite the team to actively participate in defining those goals and revising them and defining the criteria for success. And those criteria remain pretty broad, but we have all of these really meaty discussions to make sure that we get to a set of agreed goals that we're chasing for the next period of development. And as a leadership team, we aim to make sure that the team feels like they have freedom within these agreed criteria. We've signed off on what the goal is. How you reach the goal is up to you as a team member. And with that comes a set of hopefully clear expectations of when and why we feel like team members should be checking in with leadership. For example, if the agreed criteria are wrong, need to change, are unachievable, these are all good reasons to check in with leadership, and we'll revise the boundaries, we'll revise the framework so that you can still have freedom within that sandbox. Now, as I said, freedom within a framework is a journey. So at League of Geeks, we constantly look back at how we're doing things, reanalyze, and make sure that we spend as much time defining the framework as we do defining and reinforcing the freedom that we want the team to feel confident using. And this is how we get really good creative solutions to problems. The Sandbox is a very useful tool as a general, everyday definition of what we want to see happening and what goals we're chasing. But when looking at additional tension being applied, there's a more defined, reinforced sandbox that can be really, really useful. And this is what Brené Brown calls the safe container. The safe container is a set of house rules that the team knows, the team has established, that we use to manage hard conversations and tense meetings so that everyone feels safe participating. The process of setting up a safe container and reinforcing it whenever needed enables people to help each other so that it's not all on the lead to make sure that people are collaborating. There are house rules in place where everyone on the team has a level of responsibility in making sure that collaboration happens. It's really helpful to make sure that difficult conversations can happen without everyone in the room putting on armor and exploding. It fosters active participation in those difficult conversations. Now, I've mentioned Brené Brown a couple of times. She's a researcher who's done a bunch of studies into emotion and trust and vulnerability and courage and how all of that makes us good leaders and play into the role of leadership. She's written quite a few books, and she also has a podcast called Unlocking Us. If you're interested in all of that fuzzy emotional management, I highly recommend her work. In the exercise that she proposes to define that safe container is either with individual team members or with the whole team together in a room, investigate what do we need to feel open and safe when we're having stressful conversations? What can prevent us from participating? And what does support from the rest of the group look like? And that's going to be a little bit different for everyone. And that's why we need to ask, because we can't assume that what disables us as leaders from participating, what our own fuses are are true for everyone else. For me, one thing that can disable me from participating and can make me quite angry is being cut off all the time. But for other people, it's not being given a turn. They won't feel comfortable stepping in uninvited. Or, sometimes it's not having time to sit with the information and think through before being asked to voice an opinion. And understanding the makeup of your team and what support and enabling participation looks like for them specifically is really important to crafting that space. And once you know what those house rules need to be, Brené Brown recommends posting them in a place that is very, very obvious and reinforcing them regularly. At League of Geeks, we have a set of house rules when we do those big full studio discussions on values and goals for the project. And we go through those rules as we start the meeting to make sure that everyone remembers and is in the right headspace to make sure that collaboration happens. So to summarize all of the tools that we've discussed today, in terms of self-awareness, you want to know what your fuses are and what is going to make you explode. You want to understand what type of scissors you can use to cut that tension and remain your best self and lead through those stressful situations to get to a resolution. And you also want to understand what your armor is made of. What are your defense mechanisms that can get in the way of collaborating, maintaining those connections, and solving problems? All of this allows you to recognize your own emotional reactions and self-manage your stress so that you can remain your best self. You also want to make sure that through pressurized situation, you remain observant. You keep asking questions and making sure that you have all of the facts before making a call on what should or shouldn't happen. You want to remain a curious cat, and you want to notice what's missing, what are the things that are not being talked about, so that you can pinpoint problems before they're big fuses and risk explosions. That helps you collaborate with your team and get rid of stressors as they happen. And lastly, as a leader, you want to take an active role in defining how we work together as a team, both the boundaries and the play space, so that everyone feels safe and confident as to how collaboration is meant to happen. And you may want to have a safe container for really hard, tense conversations, so that everyone can participate with confidence that they're going to be respected and that we can solve problems together. That wraps up my talk for today. I hope some of the tools are immediately useful to you and that you're excited about trying them out. I'm Emilie Poissenot. This is my contact information. I'm the lead game designer at League of Geeks, and we are currently hiring. So if you're interested, check out our career website. And lastly, thank you very much for choosing to come to my talk in this time slot. And I'm currently around in chat. I'm going to be around on Twitter. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to discuss leadership and people management. Thank you, and I hope you have a fantastic GCAP.